in the end, most medical ethical theories involve more than one principle. Occasionally you get simple theories like utilitarianism that have just one principle, but the textbook talks about several principles, not only beneficence and non-maleficence, but respect for autonomy and veracity and fidelity and avoidance of killing, where the claim is that each of those principles tells you the morally right behavior, assuming only one principle is on the table. But the interesting problem emerges when two principles seem to be at stake in a moral choice, and they pull you in opposite directions. Where, to take a simple example we've talked about before, you're deeply committed as a health professional not to harm your patient, but you're also deeply committed as a moral individual to speak truthfully. What do if the only way you can imagine speaking truthfully will upset your patient, will cause some harm? That's an example of a conflict between two principles. Or you respect autonomy of the patient, but you also know that there's a moral principle that says it's wrong to kill. Well, what do you do when the patient says, "Doc, it's time for me to end it. I'm suffering terribly. Won't you put me out of my misery?" If you respect patient autonomy and you believe in the wrongness of killing, you've got a conflict there. One strategy, one that's talked about in the book, is to simply list the principles and balance the competing claims. It's a very popular strategy. It's used by some of my colleagues here at the Kennedy Institute. I think it presents some problems, particularly if the conflict is between one of the what I call consequence maximizing principles, doing good and avoiding harm, conflict between one of those principles and one of the principles that tell us that certain behaviors are just wrong, like violating autonomy or telling a lie or breaking a promise. As an alternative to simply balancing the competing claims, my preference is to give first priority to the non-consequentialistic principles. That's fancy language for never letting adding up of benefit and harm become so weighty that it overpowers one of the other principles. I believe that it's always wrong to kill, and at least in medicine, no amount of good consequences and no amount of avoiding harm will justify an active intentional killing. The only way I can get to that conclusion is by saying these non-consequence maximizing principles, like avoiding killing, take priority over the duty to do good and avoid harm. Likewise with autonomy, I always support respecting autonomy, even if I know that respecting a patient's autonomy will lead to bad consequences for the patient. If we balance them, we get into some real moral dilemmas. In research medicine, for example, if I can do a research project on you against your consent, that is, by violating your autonomy, I can probably show it may do you some harm. That's morally relevant. But there's an infinite number of future people out there who will benefit. And if infinite gets pretty large, so if I have an infinite number of people who will benefit and I add up all that benefit, and I can balance the competing claims, eventually I get such weight on the benefit to future generations that I'm justified not only in harming you, but in harming you against your will, against your autonomy. If you believe, as I do, that it's always wrong to do a research project on a patient without that patient's consent, then you've got to have a moral theory that balances the competing principles in such a way that autonomy never loses to future generations' utility. My approach of giving priority weight to the non-consequentialistic principles is consistent with our common sense conclusion that I can't do a research project on you without your consent, even if I can show that I'll help lots and lots of other people in future generations if I just hurt you a little against your will.